Thanks for joining us today for study number 15 in the book of Numbers in our 3-year journey through the scriptures in what we are calling Search the Scriptures, based on Alan Stibb's book by the same title. And we are on study number 15, which covers Numbers 21. And in the study today, we're going to attempt to answer two different groups of questions. The first group being this: Israel's reaction to adversity gets a little monotonous, and it's easy to say, why can't they learn to trust God? But are not we often just as unbelieving? And notice how Jesus uses this story as a type in John chapter 3, and what parallels are there in the condition of the afflicted in the means of salvation in each case. And why a serpent on the pole? Then the second question: it is worth tracing Israel's journey on a map from chapter 20 and verse 1 in Numbers, and notice how circuitous it was and what evidence is there as against chapter 20 and verse 2 and 3 and 21 verses 4 through 5 that Israel was learning trust and obedience through discipline. And what discipline? Let's look at Numbers 21. I'm not going to look at the whole chapter or read the whole chapter today, but just a portion of it there at the beginning. Beginning with verse number 1, when the Canaanite king of Arad, who lived in the Negev, heard that Israel was coming along the road to Atharim, he attacked the Israelites and captured some of them. And then Israel made this vow to the Lord: if you will deliver these people into our hands, we will totally destroy their cities. And the Lord listened to Israel's plea, and he gave the Canaanites over to them. They completely destroyed them and their towns, so the place was named Hormah. And they traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom, but the people grew impatient on the way, and they spoke against God and against Moses, and they said, why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the desert? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food. And then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them, and they bit the people, and many Israelites died. And the people came to Moses and said, we sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us. So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said to Moses, make a snake and put it up on a pole, and anyone who is bitten can look at it and live. So Moses made a bronze snake and put it on a pole, and then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, he lived. Back again to the questions. Israel's reaction to adversity gets a little monotonous, and it's easy to say, why can't they learn to trust God? But are we not often just as unbelieving? And notice how Jesus uses this story as a type in John chapter 3, and what parallels are there in the condition of the afflicted and in the means of salvation in both cases. And why a serpent on the pole? Well, the typology of Christ being lifted up and the serpent being lifted up in the wilderness is one that is often misunderstood and hard to deal with. There was a very popular chorus sung in Pentecostal churches for a time that declared in a real celebratory type of fashion, when I am high and lifted up, I will draw men unto me. Well, this is, of course, a biblical statement, but the song painted the wrong picture. The picture didn't match the scripture. It painted the picture of him being high and lifted up in exaltation, whereas the lifting up that Jesus was referring to, the scripture was referring to, is the crucifixion. The second thing that is hard for many to deal with in the equating of Jesus on the cross with a serpent on a pole is that the image of a serpent and Jesus are just really, really hard for us to put together. The same thing can be said when Jesus told us to be as wise as serpent and as harmless or as innocent as doves. It's hard for us to see serpents in a positive spiritual light. After all, it was a serpent in the Garden of Eden that told Eve to eat at the tree, so it's hard for us to get that image. So the question remains then, why a serpent? Well, the serpent, Numbers chapter 15, was a representation of sin. And what it was representing was what was destroying them. It was, after all, serpents biting them on their heels, as it talks about in Genesis 3:15. The serpent will snap at your heel. It was that serpent that was destroying them. Sin is destroying us. So the object of what was destroying them was put on the pole. Now we don't think of the object of what was destroying us as being put on the cross. We think of the object of what was saving us as being on the cross. But Jesus, the Word says, took our sin upon him and became sin for us. So while indeed the Son of God was lifted up on the cross, it was at the same time our sin that was nailed there. So when we look to him, when he is high and lifted up, when he becomes sin for us and is nailed to that pole, we can look to him and be healed of sin. Second question, it's worth tracing Israel's journey on a map from 21 onwards, and notice how circuitous it was and what evidence is there for that Israel was learning trust and obedience through discipline. And what kind of discipline? Well, of all the problems, all the disobedience, all the grumbling that seemed to befall the nation of Israel, one thing that they seemed to be unswervingly clear about and they cling to, and that was the cloud of the presence of God. Yeah, there's a lot of grumbling from time to time, more than from time to time, all the time. They're grumbling. But there's never much reference to anyone going AWOL from the cloud of the presence of God. They followed the cloud of presence, whether it made seemingly good military or practical or survival sense at all. They followed it, and we need to give them credit for that. I hope that you are following the presence of God, following the leading of God, whether it seems right or not, whether it seems to make sense or not. I hope you're putting all of your faith and all of your trust in God. And I hope you are having a fantastic day. I hope the rest of the day gets even better. And I hope you are enjoying our time in this wonderful book of Numbers. God bless.